Hey everybody, it's Mike and welcome to Chip Damage. And today I want to do something a little different. Today I want to talk about the game that's on everybody's minds at the current moment, that is Resident Evil 8 Village. Yes, so this game released about a week ago, and if you haven't seen my unboxing of the Collector's Edition, where we take a good look at this handsome fellow Chris Redfield right here, please check that out. But right now, I wanted to talk about my thoughts on the game. It's fresh on the mind. I completed the first playthrough. I'm on the second playthrough, trying to get all the cool unlockables. And I have a lot of things to say about it. And I want to have a discussion with you, my subscribers, and the general Resident Evil community out there of what they thought about it, what I thought about it, the things I loved about it, some things I didn't love about it, what I want to see next. And yeah, just kind of spiel about how different and how same in some aspects this game is from the rest of the series. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to talk about the 3 collector's edition of figures that you see in front of you, how well they kind of line up now that we have a new edition of them. And then, yes, I want to talk about the story and gameplay of this game. So big spoiler warning. If you don't want the story of Resident Evil 8 spoiled for you, please leave and check back after you beat the game. You can stick around while I talk around the figures. But other than that, yeah, I do kind of want to go in depth about some of the story of this game. But as a general rule, I'll get this out of the way. I love this game. I really enjoyed it. So if you're on the fence and you just want a recommendation of whether you should play it, buy it, check it out, please do. I don't like giving numbers or like fixed scores to games, but if you need something like that, this, I guess right now, this is like in the 9-ish area. Check it out. It's a great game if you're a Resident Evil fan, and even if you're just looking for a good horror game or a good game in general, go check it out. Resident Evil 8 Village is worth the money and worth your time. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the imperative right in front of me, and that's the figures from the collector's editions. If you're ever interested in these, yes. So if you haven't seen my other videos on the Resident Evil collector's editions, please check them out where I go over what came with these in more depth for the last couple recent Resident Evil releases and their various collector's editions. But for the last 3 big releases, that is Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil 3 Remake, and Resident Evil 8 Village, they came in the United States with a collector's edition that was exclusive to GameStop in North America for whatever reason, and each one of those came with these nice statues, these figures, if you will. And yeah, Resident Evil 2 Remake came with young Leon here, Resident Evil 3 came with Resident Evil 3 Remake came with my girl Jill right here, and Resident Evil 8 Village came with Chris Redfield right in the center. And they're fantastic. As you can see, they all kind of line up in scale. They're all about the right size. You know, Chris is the big guy, Leon's a little slimmer, Jill looking good on the left, and they're all kind of the size they should be. And I really hope they continue with this trend, whether they do a remake of Code Veronica or some other game starring Claire. I hope we can get Claire Redfield. And I always say this to kind of complete the core 4 of Resident Evil. I always consider the main characters of Resident Evil to be Chris, Jill, Leon, and Claire. And it'd be great. It'd be like getting the Beatles together to have statues of the same scale and production of all the 4 main Resident Evil games. And then I want a game starring all 4 of them. We've never had that. I want that. I particularly want Chris... Chris is kind of the connecting fluid. I particularly want Leon and Jill to meet. They've never met in-game as far as I know. Let me know if I'm wrong about that in the comments. But yeah, with that out of the way, they're fantastic figures. They line up. I wish their bases kind of connected. They don't. As you can see, there's no way to get them any closer than this unless you were to remove them from the bases. But you cannot do that, so you have to keep them at least this distance apart. Not a big deal, but I'm assuming that these were kind of made with the intention of future figures being released later. I'm not sure about that. But, you know, these games came out pretty close together, only about a year or so apart from one another, so I wish there was some kind of base connectivity. But yeah, each one of these figures is great. They'll look great in any collection. There's some good detail on them. Each one kind of has a base representing the game they're from. So Leon is still a rookie cop, day 1 cop at this point. So he has, if you can see there, the... Raccoon City Police Department logo kind of on the base, nice touch. And he has his name embroidered in gold. All 3 characters have their name in gold on the front, which is real nice and uniform. Chris has this BSAA like wolf unit logo here, kind of also, if you can see that, like representing the wolf, the werewolves in Resident Evil 8. It looks real good. And Jill has the stars insignia on her base, which I really love because stars are the best. They're the OGs. But yeah. Just a quick word on these figures. They're looking real good lineup. If they stop here, that's fine. You got Chris, Jill, and Leon, those are, that's good enough, but I really want to get a Claire to kind of complete the quartet. But with that out of the way, let's talk about this handsome fellows game. Let's talk about Resident Evil 8 Village. And I'm going to call it that, by the way. I will not cut out the 8. I know it's not in the official title, and I mentioned in my unboxing, I hate that. The Capcom's kind of going away from numbers. The reason they do that, everyone knows, is that the company does not want to scare away newcomers. Like, oh, I don't want to jump into the 8th one of a game. So they kind of cut the number, and then they kind of just use subtitles from there. I like what Capcom's doing. I loved what they did with 7. They kind of put the Roman numeral of 8 in the word village so that fans know what it is. They're not shy about saying it's the main installment, the 8th main installment of this franchise, but they're actually like eliminating the number 8 and just kind of winking at it. I don't want that. I want them to be called Resident Evil 9. I want them to be proud of their heritage. This is a story, a world that has been going on since 1996 continuously. Like there is one story from 1996. There's not many franchises that do that don't reboot or cut their story. Like there was Metal Gear Solid from 1987 till 2015. That's ended. And, of course, there's franchises that have run that long, like Final Fantasy, but Final Fantasy is an anthology series where every numbered entry is different. So I just like when they don't really care if they're when companies don't really care if they're snagging that new audience. And that's what they have to do. They're a corporation. It's a job, right? They got to make money. But I like them to be proud of that numeral, like Resident Evil 8. We've lasted this long. We've gotten to the 8th one. So that's my mini rant on the title of the game. Just wanted to say, hope they keep those numbers running, and the next game is called Resident Evil 9. But let's talk about the game itself. Like I mentioned prior, I love this game. I thought this was fantastic. This is probably the best game I've played so far in 2021, and I hope we get more of it. It took me a few days to beat the game. I did it on a normal playthrough. It took me about 10 and a half hours without rushing. I was trying to get as much as I could, but I didn't go out of my way to find every GOAT collectible and every little hidden nook and cranny just because I knew I was going to replay this. Every good Resident Evil game is built around its replay value, and this game certainly is. So if you wanted to know that, let's get that out of the way. It has fantastic replay value. I was on the edge of my seat. This game legitimately scared me a few times. Not in like the jump scare kind of way. I think it got me once or twice, but it did have a creepy atmosphere. I love that. They actually gave some characterization to Ethan Winters, the main character that you play as. Like really try to hide his face. It kind of is like a detriment. Like he's not a blank character. He's not a creative character. Like I know in a lot of games they hide the character's face so that you can kind of identify with him, or the character doesn't speak so you can identify him. But Ethan Winters is a person with a history, and he's very clearly like a white blonde man in his mid-30s. Like just show his face. It would not harm the character. Like there's some weird scenes that you'll see where like there's family photos or cutscenes where they just blot out his face. And we kind of know what he looks like, unless it's not a big deal. But whatever. It really didn't hurt the game. It wasn't too much of a detriment. But let's start with the gameplay of this game. Let's get into a discussion of what I liked and disliked. And like I said, whether you agree or disagree, please leave a comment. I would love reading what other people think of this game because it's early. We're still in that nebulous period where you can't, at least I can't place this game. I can't rank it amongst the Resident Evil main games because, there's still DLC to come out. I'm sure there's still, I'm going to like things. I'm going to dislike things on multiple playthroughs. So please, let me know what you think. But gameplay-wise, so of course this is a first-person game. I would not call it a first-person shooter. I mean, yes, you do shoot in first person, but there's a lot more to it. That it's still a survival horror game. That is still the main aspect, like gathering resources, keeping your health up, building and crafting, and avoiding certain enemies if necessary. But regardless, it's a first-person game. And if you play Resident Evil 7, it didn't really change much in terms of feel of that game. You still kind of move at the same pace. It's the same engine, it's the RE engine, so it wasn't a massive change. But one of the big changes I really liked about this was the upgradable weapons. So unlike in Resident Evil 7, there was a straight-out shot, just like in Resident Evil 4, maybe to a slightly smaller degree, but there is a shopkeeper called the Duke, big fat 900-pound guy that just pops in, and I love him. He's fantastic. He's very encouraging, and he'll sell stuff to you. You can sell stuff to him for more money. I believe it's pronounced lay. You can craft things there. You can sell them treasures. Everything you could basically do with the merchant, the what are you buying guy from Resident Evil 4, you can do with the Duke. I really enjoyed that. You even have the case that everyone loves so much, where you have to kind of fit things into your inventory. It's fine. I never really encountered much of an issue fitting things into the case because I was prioritized enlarging the case whenever I could. I do recommend that you do that. It just gives you some peace of mind. It's not that expensive in the game. But yeah, this had a more in-depth upgrade system than I thought. So of course you can upgrade the firepower, the reload speed, the rate of fire, the ammo capacity for all your weapons. But you can also like have, how can I put it? Enhancements, modifications to weapons like scopes and handles and barrels. And that was in Resident Evil 4, but I believe like it's more shocking how much they've added to that in Resident Evil 8. Like, it's all there. There's multiple upgrades for multiple guns. And there's more versions of each gun than just one. Like, there's multiple versions of shotguns and pistols and assault rifles and sniper rifles. Like, there's not just one each, which is a big change from 7. Like, this has a full arsenal, and I was very surprised by that. Some weapons so far that I've seen are just clearly better than others. But yeah, this game kind of has that more tactical gaminess of Resident Evil 4, which I love. Just to say, Resident Evil isn't a series that I necessarily play for the story. Like, I love the characters and I like, you know, evil corporations, but I've always felt, and I think the intention of Resident Evil 8 is not to be high art in the storytelling department. It's campy. It's a send up to B movies and horror genres and tropes of that. What I like most about Resident Evil is the vibe, like the horror like setting, which surrounds a good game. Like, it's a game about pace to me. It's a game about like getting through doors, finding your way through enemies, finding upgrades, and then beating the game, which usually, you know, is kind of tough the first time, and then knowing where to go, knowing what weapons to get. And that's the loop. Like, you replay it. That's what I like about Resident Evil. Like, the horror aesthetic, the setting, that is the candy coating around the tasty nougat of a good game, if you will. Like, I just love that. And that's what this game has. This game has a brisk clip. Like I said, it's not overly long. Like I said, without rushing, kind of going at a slowish medium pace, I beat the game in about 10 and a half hours. And that's the next thing I want to talk about is kind of the setting of the game. Moving on from the weapons to the environments, this game looks fantastic. The very first environment encounter is the Winter's Home in Eastern Europe. It's just Europe, but it's like Romania. Just like how Resident Evil 4 was Europe, but it's Spain. They speak Spanish. They speak, you know, like where else, you know. I love that they did this in Resident Evil 3 as well, where you're in Jill Valentine's apartment in first person and you can just kind of wander around, get a feel for her home. And the clutter is fantastic. And that's what you find in the Winter's Home in the beginning of Resident Evil Village. Like, I love the old Resident Evil pre-rendered backgrounds. I love pre-rendered backgrounds in general because, like, even though you can't interact with it too much, like, there's clutter. Things feel lived in. There's detail. You just want to, like, take a knee and look at objects in the background, and you get a sense for your environment. And I love that in the beginning of Resident Evil 8 and throughout Resident Evil 8. 7 had this as well. Like, just so many little details. Like, one of my favorite environments in Resident Evil 7 was Zoe's trailer in the courtyard or the backyard of the Baker estate. Just like, it told you who she was. There's little things that like a young girl would have around her room, just little lights. And that's the sense you get right off the bat with 8. You know, moving on from the Winter's Home, you pretty much very quickly find yourself in the titular village. And yeah, there's just like a lot of things, a lot of clutter, a lot of things to stare at. The village itself isn't that large. It is honeycombed. Like, it's hard to kind of get around until later in the game when you have all the keys and you have to unlock a lot of gates. It's actually a little annoying at times. Like, oh, damn, I can't open this door. I have to walk all the way around. I'm just about me, by the way, in video games in general. I'm pretty good at combat. I'm decent at puzzles. I have no sense of direction. I am a map checker. Like, I get lost in real life very easily. I just don't have... I don't know if it's spatial awareness, but I'm not good at memorizing pathing. And that got to me a few times in Village. Like I said, it is not huge, but you do kind of have to worm your way around. And the color palette is muted. It is the Village itself is very grayish white. So as I'm kind of worming around, I could never, and like I said, I'm only a playthrough and a half through this. It was a little hard for me to map from just like visual looking where I was in the town. And that may be something that bothers you or doesn't bother you, but it doesn't really bother me. But just as a general, like, it's a small honeycomb town with a good amount of detail that's just a little It's not the most visually distinct. It has a great look to it overall, but you can get kind of, all right, I needed to go around and open this door on this side, and there's a bit of that. Thankfully, there's a fantastic map in this game, and that's what, talking about environments, let's talk about that right now. Just like in Resident Evil 2 and 3, Remake, started in 2. When you look at your map, if you've been in a room and you've gotten everything, the room will highlight blue, and if you haven't, it stays red. That's amazing because there are so many nooks and crannies in this game, like I said, that really helps. You don't want to miss something good and walk out. And it's not always immediately apparent where everything is hidden, so it does make you work for a little bit. If you go up to a door and it's locked and it needs a certain key, it marks on the map what kind of key you need. I love that. I know it makes the game easier in a way, I guess, but it still it makes you explore. It still rewards exploration because you want that blue room. You want that door open. I love that. I think that's fantastic for people with no sense of direction like myself. So that's great. And then moving on, there are other environments past the village itself. There's, of course, the castle area. And like I said, I'll give one more warning. Past this, we're going into some heavy spoilers. So spoilers, if you're fast forwarding the video, please leave and come back after you finish the game. Thank you for joining us. We'll catch you later, hopefully. But yes, the castle, which was in the demo, one of the demos, multiple. There were so many demos for this game for Resident Evil 8. The castle's fantastic. Like I said, lots of detail. Not the like largest area in the game. It's not the biggest it's not a Castlevania castle, but it's big for something like Resident Evil. And there's lots of nooks and crannies and hidden rooms that you will explore. And it's fantastic. It has like, you know, that medieval kind of gaminess to it where it's like, oh, hidden behind a painting and, you know, hitting up in the annex. And I love that. There's a courtyard and there's a library and it's got that gothic aesthetic. Fantastic. Great environment, and then you move on to, and we'll come back to the characters that inhabit each one of these areas afterwards, but let's get through the environments. And then moving after that, you come to the house, I believe it is Beneviento, Donna, the Third Lord's house, which is I guess a Western-inspired ghost type of house, like those haunted dolls. This house is out on a cliffside on the outer edge of the village, and you go in there, and there's just something eerie about it. This is one of my favorite environments in the game. Like, you walk in this house, you know it's one of the Four Lords. You know at this point that she has something to do with possessed dolls or evil dolls or living dolls. And you go in, and there's like no enemies in this area. It's just a house that looks like it's slightly not taken care of. And that's great, because you're uneasy. You're like, okay, at this point, your weapons are taken away for a brief moment, and you're like, what type of game play aspect are they going for with this? And you go through and you go into the basement and you continue along with the game, and it goes dark. And this is a fantastic part of the game. The environment just makes it almost PT-like. It almost becomes... I'm glad this part is brief because I think it works best in brief chunks, but it becomes like an Outlast type thing where you can only run from one of the scariest enemies in the game. It's probably the most terrifying part of the game is what happens in this dollhouse. And you make your way back up. It's very surreal. It has a more supernatural feel than the rest of Resident Evil. Less sci-fi horror and more, you know, traditional ghost horror. Fantastic. Moving along to the next Lord Moreau, you go to like a fishing village. And for my Bloodborne fans out there, I know that that's obviously based on Lovecraft, who sets his stories in like fishing hut villages. But that's what you're kind of getting a little bit closer to as you move on. That's a fantastic environment. A lot of gross, tumorous growths on the walls. That's good. It's a rather quick part of the game, but all I could think about was the DLC of the old Hunters and Bloodborne the whole time. Like, that is the closest visual comparison. It's a good look. Everything looks rusted and gross and mucusy and infected. Moving on to the last Lord, we're going to the factory, which is, from what I've seen already, somewhat of a controversial part of the game. The factory itself, you know, it's not my favorite part of the game because I have no sense of direction, like I said, and that is very important in the factory. But the actual look of it, grinding gears and like rust and steam and smoke and darkness with red light, pretty cool. Like, there are parts that are almost like remind me of that chase scene at the end of the original Terminator with all like the gears moving and like something chasing you throughout it. Like, it's almost that vibe mixed with like some like European horror, like Hostel-esque, like, you know, just metal and flesh all winding together, like Dr. Frankenstein, like Neo Dr. Frankenstein. And I know there's that that director of that Frankenstein movie from a few years back that thinks Resident Evil ripped off his monsters. I don't know if it's true, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But I like the factory for its aesthetic. Maybe not the running around part as much, but a very cool look. And overall, Resident Evil 8 has a fantastic look. I'd say at this moment, having just gone through all the locations, I like the kind of closeness of 7 perhaps a bit more, and that may change. But I like the kind of staying all in one or two areas for 7, and it felt maybe perhaps slightly more detailed with like little effects of the Baker family. But 8 comes pretty damn close. 8 has detail in every one of its environments. The game looks fantastic. It has good coloring. You kind of feel, depending on where you are in the game, like the color palette kind of accentuates it. Like the village is gray. There's a very mauvish reddish tone in the castle. Moreau is like this sick green. There's like a paleness in Donna, the doll lord's house, and like obviously a very industrial, like hard red and orange and steel colored look in the factory. And I think they distinguish each one of those areas. Look great. Great environments that they crammed all into this little town. But let's move on a little bit more into characters and story. And yeah, let's get right down to it. Everyone knows this game as the game with, you know, Big Lady Dimitrescu, Alcina. She was kind of the forefront of the marketing material at a certain point. And I don't know if that was Capcom's intention from the beginning, or if after a trailer or two, they picked up word of how popular she was and ran with it and pushed it even harder. But if you don't know, I don't spoil games for myself, but what I do, like I don't go on theory Reddit boards and you know, look at deep dive spoilers or leaks. I like to kind of know what's going on. Don't want to know too much about what's going on, but I like to have the premise of the game. So I do watch trailers. I do watch the official trailers, and that's burned me before, but it can also increase my hype in general. Like, you know, for those who know, like Metal Gear Solid 5's trailers were amazing, and I made sure I watched all of those. Or like, think about the reveal of Resident Evil 7's trailer. If you've seen that E3 2016 trailer, amazing. And so I kind of like to watch those official trailers. That's, like I said, it's burned me once or twice before, but I do watch all the official stuff put out. And where I'm going with this is that there is some, I don't know, controversy that Lady Dimitrescu, I'll just say Alcina, it's easy to say, or I think it's Alcina. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I am, I'll find out right after this video. But she is defeated very early on in the game. Basically, the setup is that there's 4 lords and their boss, and she's one of the 4 lords. And you have to get through the 4 lords to get to the final boss, of course. And she's defeated fairly early on in the game. She's like the first real boss in the game. And some people take umbrage with that because, like, oh, they kind of promised her as the main villain, or like that she'd have a bigger part. I never got that sense. Maybe because of the trailers that I saw, the official trailers, but like, first and foremost, there was a trailer early on that clearly shows Ethan watching a phone call between Alcina and the main villain, Mother Miranda, where she's clearly subservient to her. She's clearly afraid of this person. Even with all her power, she's calling her mother and apologizing and holding her breath a little bit. Like, so that kind of immediately let me know that this is a henchwoman. This is not the final boss. She didn't really have a look of a final boss to me. Like, she looks cool, a great design, but like, I knew going into this game that it was like werewolves and vampires and so on and so forth. Like, oh, she's the head of the vampire-esque faction. So I kind of expected her to be knocked out some point in the game. Maybe not first, but it didn't really matter. I knew she would not be the main, or at least I assumed she would not be the main part of the game, so that did not disappoint me. As far as the other bosses themselves, I think some stick out more than others. She is fantastic, Lady D and her daughters, for the opening bit of the game, and then you go to Donna Beneviento, who is just the creepiest. You never actually confront this character directly. This character's abilities is that she produces illusions and can control dolls, maybe or maybe not control like many dolls at once. You're never too clear on it. You know, I haven't poured over the lore files, but it seems like she kind of divides her parasite into multiple dolls and kind of compounds that with illusion ability, and she's great. She is the horror part, the Western based horror part of this game. More for characters, more for people who have played games where you have to run and not fight. There's many of those in the last couple of years. This has a creepy, ghosty vibe, so I can't really comment on her character. The doll, I'm not afraid of dolls, but it's a cool-looking doll that she kind of speaks through. It's a creepy doll named Angie. That was fine, but yeah, that whole part, her character is cool. Love that. Moving on to the next boss, Moreau. He's a loser of the group. He's like a merman, like mutant, and there's not much to him. He doesn't really command an army like the others. Like, he can command goo to kind of just sprout up anywhere, I guess, and You kind of fight him after he mutates into a water-bound creature, which kind of throws back to Del Lago, the giant salamander in Resident Evil 4. It's a cool part. It felt like the shortest part of the game, maybe kind of tied with Donna, but I didn't have much to say about him. It's cool. It reminded me of some of the Bloodborne creatures, but it didn't stick out to me. It's a part that might be a little annoying to replay, much like with Donna as well. Those aren't exactly combat-focused parts, especially Donna. It's more puzzle and running. So even on my second playthrough, the horror's kind of gone. It's still creepy, but you can't, you just kind of want to expedite that process. And same with Moreau, who does end in a cool boss fight, I will say that. So at least there's combat to that. And then there's my favorite, who's Heisenberg. Heisenberg, yet again, looks like, I don't know if they went for it or not, but it is a man in like fatigued clothes, like old dirty European clothes with a hat with a big hammer. So he looks like a Bloodborne character. I don't know, yet again, I don't know if that's what they were going for, but he reminds me of a Bloodborne hunter, and I love that. That's my favorite game on PS4. So I thought he looked cool. If you don't know, I thought initially he may be the head of the werewolf faction, because you kind of get the sense that him and Alcina don't like each other too much, like, vampires versus werewolves. But no, he is Magneto. He is just straight Magneto, and he is the head of the factory, and his whole kind of shtick is metal monstrosities, like I said, flesh and metal coming together, and he is just fantastic. As a character in general, he has a bit of a twist to him, which we'll get into later. But yes, as bosses, let's start from the beginning. Alcina, or Lady Dimitrescu, she, you do not fight her in her human form. She is a pursuer, which isn't too difficult. She's not like Mr. X or Nemesis. She's not like super fast. She's big, as everyone knows. Like, she can be kind of hard to get around, and she does a good amount of damage. But you can avoid her fairly easy. The only thing I don't like about that is you cannot stun her. You cannot like hit her and get past her real quick like you could with Mr. X and Nemesis if you did enough damage. Like, she just does not react to damage. Or if she does, I simply don't have enough firepower to do that. But I've hit her quite a few times in the face with a shotgun with no reaction. And if she is, of course, assisted by her 3 daughters, who are also pursuers and become less so as you defeat them throughout the game. And yet they are more mini-boss fights. They are quick, and you kind of defeat them throughout the castle part of the game. But Alcina is kind of the main first boss. And guess what she mutates to? And like I said, spoilers, you'd think maybe a bat or something, or, something vampire-based. No, it's basically a dragon. Like, it's like she's like she turns into like a 30-foot flying creature that she kind of sprouts out of the back of, like a humanoid torso out of the back of what I would call a dragon. And you fight her on a bell tower. It's a cool boss fight. I didn't expect that. You never officially fight her with like her Lust from Full Metal Alchemist claws. You just fight her dragon form. It's a cool boss fight. Moving on, like I said with Donna, to the next Lord. It's not so much a boss fight. What she does is she has you hallucinate that you're being chased by a horrifying, giant, deformed baby in the basement. I don't know if you want to call that a boss fight. You just kind of have to avoid it and escape back up to the house, where you fight her again, as she kind of makes you hallucinate that you're being chased by dolls, and you need to find the main doll, Angie, which I assume is real, and you stab in the face 3 times. The doll runs from you, and you have a time limit to find this doll, Angie, before the other dolls in the room, I assume, just kill you. It didn't actually kill me, but she kind of hints that they will rip you apart if you don't find Angie fast enough. So it's not a traditional boss fight. It's more of a get out of the way from the baby and then find the boss for Angie. And then moving on to Moreau, at the end of it, he turns into a giant fish monster in a small part of the village that spews acid and charges you, and you have to avoid the acid. It's a traditional boss fight. You got to hit him in the mouth. It's a cool part. I like big bosses. I like gamey bosses like that. And that's where we kind of go on to the next part. That's Heisenberg. Heisenberg, you don't fight him in his human form. He could eliminate you immediately if you wanted to. He could literally just flick a bullet or a couple into your head with his Magneto powers and finish it. But no. How you fight him, and we'll get into how this works, is the coolest way possible. And that would be to fight him in a plastic-esque, they say it's like a polymer metal hybrid, but plastic chainsaw tank. Yes, you get a tank with a machine gun, cannon, and chainsaw, and you fight him in his mutated form, where he kind of combines his flesh with a bunch of parts of metal, and he becomes like a metal, like dinosaur, like this abomination, and you just fight him through that mostly. It's one of the more epic boss fights in it. I loved it, thought it was cool. And that moves us along to the final main villain that I've been hinting at, and that's Mother Miranda, that all the other villains serve. She is a cool final boss. She doesn't feel exactly like a Resident Evil boss. She almost feels like something more akin to Silent Hill, like a cult leader. But that's what the vibe of this game was kind of going for, that kind of cultish vibe. And she's fantastic. She has a cool design. She's a looker, too. I think she gives Lady Dimitrescu a run for her money. She is, she is a beauty when you get a close-up look or old photos of her. But you kind of fight her in a big monster fight in an arena, and I loved it. I thought it was a cool final boss. She mutates using her powers over the mold, and it's a decently she got me once or twice on normal difficulty boss fight. I really enjoyed it. It's a little better than maybe the Jack Baker fight in his final form, where he's a big glob monster. In Resident Evil 7, I thought it was more enjoyable than that. And obviously, Evelyn in Resident Evil 7, where she's a big glob monster, isn't like a traditional boss fight. This was more of a straight shoot 'em out boss fight. Use everything, unload on her, anywhere you can, hit her in the face in the vital spots. I liked it. I enjoyed it. So as far as combat, environments, enemies, bosses, Resident Evil 8 is really good. It has a more varied cast than Resident Evil 7. Like there's different types of bosses. There's more enemy types of just mentioning, like, you fight everything from werewolves to ghouls is the best way I can describe them, like the hooded characters in the castle. Ghouls, like Heisenberg has variants of his own, like metallic monstrosities of ghouls and his own unique creations. There's just a good flow to combat, the bosses, the enemies. I like that. It kept you guessing. There's different forms of werewolves. There's mini bosses I didn't mention that are all kind of permutations of that. Giant werewolves with axes. Santa werewolf that everyone kind of has seen if you've watched the trailers, if you know what I'm talking about, the big bearded axe. Like, there's a good clip of enemy types. There's flying enemies. I won't go into too much more depth about it, but just know that there's a bit more variety in this than Resident Evil 7, which is something I love about Resident Evil. To me, Resident Evil is a series about monsters. That's why I love Resident Evil 3 Remake with its many varieties of monsters. That's why I like Resident Evil 4. The molded are fine in Resident Evil 7, but they're not the most varied bunch. There's only like a few variants, so I like that they kind of up the ante with that in Resident Evil 8. So yeah. That kind of does the game part. Those are my thoughts on it. It was great, fantastic in the game boss part, but let's talk about the story, all right? So let's get through this thing. This is a bonkers story in a very different way than other Resident Evil games. I don't even know how to begin with this, but let's get the quick summary out of the way. You're Ethan Winters and Mia. You have been relocated to Europe for your protection after the events of Resident Evil 7 because there are people, the Connections group, after you. You're relocated there by Chris Redfield. You're there for 3 or 4 years. You have a 6-month-old daughter named Rose with Mia. And then Chris Redfield just breaks into your house one day, shoots your wife on the head, takes you and your baby without explaining anything. And along the way, the car crashes and you stumble out into the woods and find yourself in the village. You find out your daughter is there. You want to get her back and you want to go home. That's essentially it. And it's insane from there. There's not a lot of story in the middle of that, but you find out eventually, and like I said, this is probably the craziest part. It's of the story. So like I said, if you don't want to hear it, back out now, come back later. You find out that each of the 4 lords has a part of your baby. Yes, has a vial, a jar with a piece of Rose, like her head, her legs, her torso, and her arm. It's insane. That actually threw me for a loop. Like, Resident Evil has always been a campy horror story, and like Resident Evil 4 and 5 really get out there, and 6 with the story. But like, this was different. This was like, what? You have to gather jars of your baby, and you find out through the Duke, who's a very helpful merchant, that if you gather her all together, that she has abilities from the mold she inherited from Mia that would allow her to regenerate, hopefully, if you get all the vials. And that's the story. You need to get every part of your baby back together to escape the village. And that's why you're fighting the bosses. That's why Ethan is driven to go get everyone. And that is just insane to me. Like, I wouldn't say it almost feels like it's in bad taste, but for a second it almost did that. Like, I had a vial that said Rosemary Head in the jar, and it didn't bother me for long, but it was like a shock. I'm like, okay, this is, it's on paper, it's not the craziest thing Resident Evil has ever done, but in practice, it was still pretty shocking. So you're going along, and along the way, you're defeating the lords, and you get the idea that, this town has been under terror for a long time by these lords and Mother Miranda. And one thing I love about this game, from the beginning to the marketing material, you want to know how this is a virus. Resident Evil has always been sci-fi and not supernatural. So it's like, how is this all one virus? Like, Lady Dimitrescu's daughters can turn into bugs and reform, and like, how is that at all a virus? Like, that's a stretch of supernatural. Like, how are things this way? How does Heisenberg control metal? How is this all happening? So what I really love about the game is, as you play, you kind of get it. You know that it's related to the mold from Resident Evil 7, but there's a parasite involved, and you later find out that most of these creatures stem from something called the Cadu, which was a parasite that the main character, the main villain, Mother Miranda, experimented with the mold, and it allows her to control the villagers. And but regardless, we'll get into that in a second. You find out slowly, and I love that. I love the pace, but only if you read the documents. This is like lore environmental storytelling. Like I mentioned, Lady Dimitrescu's daughters can turn into bugs. How's that a virus? Well, you find documents that they're not turning into bugs. What you're actually seeing is that those are not women turning into bugs. It's bugs turning into girls. It was an experimental insect that Lady Dimitrescu allowed to consume the flesh of some women. The bugs come together to take her shape, and that is actually what you're seeing. You're not seeing her split apart. You're seeing the insects come together. And instead of being afraid of daylight, like you would assume vampires would be, they actually don't like the cold. And since you're in like Romanian winter, it's freezing. So that's why they don't like windows. Like when you break the windows in the game, they get vulnerable. It's not the sunlight, it's the cold air. And I thought that was very cool. I'm like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. That's how it's a virus. It's a mutant insect that kind of clumps together to look like young girls. I thought that was very cool. You're like, why is Lady Dimitrescu so big? It's that, everyone reacts differently to the Kado. The lowest level of person that have affinity for it turn into lichens. The people that can't really handle it turn into the lichens or the ghouls. Like, they kind of retain some sentience, but they can only really take orders. But if you have better kind of control over it, you retain something more of a human form. So you find files later on that Lady Dimitrescu had very high compatibility with the Kado, Kadu, I'm sure I'll find out later. So she retained mostly a human form except for her height. But like Moreau, the fishman, had relatively low affinity for the Kadu, so he looks like a fishman. And then you find out Heisenberg has the highest level of kind of affinity with the Kado, so he looks completely human for the most part. You never see him take his coat off, but to the naked eye, he looks completely human. And I thought that was very cool. And you find out that like his Kadu gave him electric organs like an eel, and that has like an effect on the magnetism, and that's how he controls metal. And I like the way they kind of explain the virus, and they go into more depth of the source of the mold. So going into even more spoilers, why is your daughter kidnapped by Mother Miranda? She is the 100-year-old mother of a girl named Eve, who died during the Spanish flu 100 years ago. And she stumbled into a cave and randomly found the mutametasite, giant fetal root of a plant. And through that, discovered its abilities and the mold. She is kind of the originator, the first person who's encountered the mold. And throughout the century, she tried to revive her daughter. She couldn't do it herself. She gave some of that data to an evil pharmaceutical company, thinking that maybe they could, and that's how they made Evie, or Evelyn, from Resident Evil 7. She was that company's kind of attempt to make a weapon like with Miranda's powers, and at the same time kind of be a revival for her daughter. And I thought that was very cool. And she was obviously a failure, but Miranda believes that since Mia was infected with the mold, that her genes passing down to her daughter Rosemary would be a perfect vessel for her daughter, because you find out that the mind of every person infected with the mold stays in like the hive, the mutametasite. You kind of see this in Resident Evil 7 when Jack Baker speaks directly to Ethan's brain. He kind of has like an out-of-body experience. So she wants to take her daughter's consciousness out of the mold, put it into Rosemary's body so she could have her daughter back. And she has been keeping track of Ethan and Mia since the event. She, in fact, took Mia's place in your home. She kidnapped Mia when I guess no one was looking, stuck her in a jail cell near her hideout, and shapeshifted, that's one of her abilities, to be Mia, to kidnap your daughter. Chris Redfield had heard of this, knew this was going on, and that's why he broke into your house, tried to kill Mia. He was actually trying to kill Miranda. He never said this to you because I guess he didn't want to scare you or get you involved, but like you're pretty involved. And he was actually trying to take you and your daughter to safety, but Miranda was not dead, woke up, knocked off the convoy, kidnapped your baby, and that's how the game kind of begins. And Chris has been bouncing around the village trying to help you out, try to stop all this. And I love that. I'm so glad that Chris Redfield was not a bad guy. I did not want to have to kill Chris Redfield. I did not want him to be the new Wesker. Chris is one of my favorite characters. Resident Evil 5 is one of my favorite Resident Evils. Don't string me up for that, but I was so glad that this was not the end to a character that we've known since 1996. He's still around. He survives the game. He's not a villain. But yeah, so that's the plot. That's it. Like how this all kind of came together. I like it. And there's a few stretches and a few things that feel kind of tacked on. Like in the greater Resident Evil universe, even though the 7, 8, and 9 are supposed to be kind of their own trilogy, how does this connect? Kind of flimsily, you find a note. If you're careful, if you look at all the notes, the documents, you find out that Miranda was a mentor to a very young Oswald Lee Spencer who'd go on later to find Umbrella. And throughout the game, you see the Umbrella logo kind of on the stone tablets and the temples around the village, and you're kind of wondering why. You won't know why unless you find this one document that's right before the last section of the game. Very easy to miss. And he's like, oh, I kind of like that Umbrella logo in so many words. I'm paraphrasing. So, I'm going to go start my own thing because I'm not trying to revive just one young girl. I'm trying to, make humans perfect. But yeah, I like that logo that we studied together, so I'm taking that. It's very tangential, like how it connects to the main Resident Evil universe. It doesn't really bother me because its own lore in the game, its own kind of why everything is happening kind of works. Like I said, there's some shocking moments, like when you find out Rose is a baby, and the other shocking moment that we're going to get into right now, yet again, huge spoiler, Ethan is a mold man. Yes, you find out that throughout 7 and 8, you incur some hideous injuries that are fixed with a first aid spray or first aid vial, and you just kind of can reconnect limbs and survive getting torn apart, and you're fine because in the beginning of Resident Evil 7, when Jack Baker knocked you out and dragged you through the house, he killed you. You died and your body was replaced by mold. So you have been able to survive all this because Ethan is not human and has been living apparently a normal life for 4 years with a pseudo-undead body or a living body that is not normal. And Mother Miranda really drives this home when she rips your heart out of your chest and it basically just knocks you out. Yeah, right before the boss fight with her, she rips your heart out and escapes. But you have a small section where you play as Chris, and then Ethan just wakes up and he's pretty much good to go fight the last boss. And that was like, wow, that's pretty nuts. Like that, he's not the only superpowered person that we've seen in Resident Evil or that we've even been able to play as. Like, Albert Wesker is a superhuman, and you assume that his son, Jake Mueller, also has some abilities because he's able to like bare hand fight BOWs. But regardless, it was still like this regular guy, this poor sucker, is a mold man, and you defeat Miranda and you save your daughter, and it's a really touching scene, but it looks like the heart rip was a little bit too much for the mold body, so you start to kind of fall apart. So Chris takes your baby, he promises to raise her well, and then Ethan blows up the village, destroying the mold, the mutametasite, the giant fetal root, kind of cleansing the area. And that's kind of the end. Mia and Rose are safe on a helicopter getting away with Chris, who mentions that the BSA have gone bad. And something that I'm sure is going to be DLC down the road. He mentions that he is a splinter group of the BSAA. When he went after Miranda, he took a group with him, and that the main group of the BSAA are now corrupt and are now sending BOWs like zombie men to fix things up. And he's now aware of this, so he's going to go to Europe to fix it. I don't know if that's going to be Resident Evil 9 or DLC, but they just kind of mention it and the game ends, and then it cuts to a couple years in the future where you see that Rosemary has grown up. She's a strong, healthy-looking teenager, and that she hints that she definitely has abilities, passed down to her from maybe her mother or father. They don't go into detail, but she definitely hints that she has abilities that not even Chris Redfield knows about. She mentions that he's still alive. Now, this is weird. Then on the screen it says the father's story is done, and that's the end of the game. So I have many thoughts on this ending. Number one, I don't know if the next game is going to be a time jump to, I don't know, 15, 20 years in the future, or if the next game will be Chris going after the BSAA. I'm not sure if there's going to be spin-offs, but that's why this is fun. This is this nebulous period. I want to hear what your thoughts are about this. It would be very weird to me if Resident Evil 9 was a 20-year time jump, because what about the other characters? What have Leon, Chris, Jill, what are they up to? I feel like before you do a time jump like that, you kind of need to tie up all your loose ends, and maybe DLC and side titles would do that, but I don't want necessarily a side title of, oh, this is what Jill Valentine did post Resident Evil 8 before Resident Evil 9, before the time period. Like, I guess that would be a large period of time where you can fill in titles on the side, but I always feel like, you should play as someone related to these characters in the main games. Like, will you play as Rose in Resident Evil 9 with her super abilities, quote unquote, and the other characters are just old and supporting you or possibly dead? I'm not sure. I don't know if I would like that. Maybe they'll pull it off. Capcom's done it before. I didn't think I would like a first-person Resident Evil set in the south of the United States, but hey, lo and behold, I did. So I trust them. But I don't feel like the next game will be necessarily 15 years in the future. We'll see. Maybe that's the DLC. Maybe that's the future. Or maybe those are the spin-off titles and the main titles will be, focusing more on our core 4, because there's a lot left over. There's the Connections, the group that made this all happen and experimented with the mold. There's the loose ends with, Jake Mueller and everything going on with that. I just don't feel like we're quite ready to see 65-year-old Ada Wong, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Leon, and Claire. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're going to see. And I'm very interested in what they're going to, how they're going to go forward. Resident Evil has stumbled once before, and they've been able to recover. I don't feel like they're about to stumble, but if they do, I know they always bring it right back. What do I personally want to see? I'm not sure. I want DLC, that's for sure. But when you beat the game, there's a little bit more to do. It unlocks the Mercenaries mode. Let's get back to the game. I love how much stuff unlocks once you beat this game. They did it right with this. They did it a lot more than they did with RE7. When you beat this game, you unlock the content shop, where you can unlock unlimited ammo for every single one of the guns in the game. If you have upgraded fully all the weapons in the main campaign, you can purchase with in-game points that you get through achievements, in-game achievements, infinite ammo variants of those weapons. You can get concept art. You can get other things like development notes. It's very cool. It's going to take a while to unlock. I cannot wait to do that. But you also unlock the Mercenaries mode. It's funny. It's dirt cheap. It's in the shop. You have to purchase it, but it's nothing. You have to have enough money to get it. But Mercenaries mode is a little different. This is not co-op, sadly. One day, I hope, maybe, who knows. But it is not one area where you were fighting infinite enemies for time. No, it is a sequence of areas that you go through getting high scores, but it's really cool how they do it. So, example, first one, you start in the village, the kind of main commissary area, the graveyard area, and littered around the stage are, of course, enemies and time bubbles, but there's also power-up bubbles, and that's new. What these are, they're blue spheres that if you hit, you can choose between a random 3 set of powers that either buff you or debuff your enemies, and they stack, and it's amazing. I don't want to get demonetized by cursing, but it is freaking great. Please check that out. The Mercenaries, like I said, a little disappointed that it is not co-op, but it's a bigger type of Mercenaries mode. So, you beat one area, you clear out one area, and you move to the next. It could be another part of the village. I haven't done them all, or it could be another part of the castle with slightly stronger enemies. I believe there are 4 maps right now, and then you can do 4 more on the higher difficulty where it changes things quite a bit. But the ability tree is just so cool, the unlockable blue sphere abilities. You can slow enemies down, you can speed yourself up, you can do 5 times more damage with a knife or a shotgun. Enemies explode when they fall. It's amazing. You get health when you kill enemies. They really went for it with this. It's just that arcadey feel. So if you don't want to go through the story, you just want to kill some werewolves and some ghouls, hop in, chick, you fight some mini bosses in there too. Just get in there, shoot them out, pick your favorite weapon. and collect some money, upgrade, have a good time. I love Mercenaries. I've probably put more time into Mercenaries mode of 4 and 5 than I have the main campaign, and I've gone through each one of those games 10 times. But Mercenaries is always my fallback. Hey, I got nothing to do. Let me play it, and I hope 8 can continue that trend. I'd love some DLC maps. Now, on the note of DLC, 7 had amazing DLC with, End of Zoe, where you're just punching Jack Baker. You're punching molded as Joe Baker. You're just knocking guys out with your bare fist. And they had the Daughters DLC, which was great. Resident Evil 2 had some fun DLC with like those little side campaigns. Resident Evil 3, which I loved, the remake, didn't have any DLC that wasn't for that, like, resistance, like that. And I hated that. I wish it had some DLC, like a Mercenaries mode, because that's the game it started in. I think the third-person format is a little better for the Mercenaries, and that dodge mechanic would have been fantastic, but that's neither here nor there. That's a disappointment. I hope it gets DLC, but there's a lot of game here, though, if it doesn't. There's the Mercenaries, and this game encourages multiple playthroughs. It wants you to beat it in 3 hours for a trophy. I can't wait to do that. I'm going to get some infinite ammo and some speed power-ups before I do that. By the way, like I said, if I forgot to mention, one big difference between this and the other Resident Evil, the prior one, 7, is that there are some permanent upgrades you can get by hunting random animals throughout the environment, such as speed on boost, health upgrades, and blocking boost. Nothing too deep, but it's a notable feature. And everything carries over into New Game Plus. Whatever you had on you in the last one, Sans Treasures, will carry over to the new playthrough. I think that's great. It makes it easier to play. Want to try the new difficulties, but yeah, I love this game, and I think I've talked about it enough. But that's my 2 cents. Most of the features are great. Some things I didn't like, let's see. Maybe the fact, like I said, the environment, I think I just liked 7 more. Maybe that's more my vibe. I like kind of the closeness of the environments. Some parts of the game may not be, like I mentioned, super fun to play through again, like down to Viento's, the doll part. Like when you know what's coming, it's not as scary. That scare factor kind of goes away, and that part is clearly designed to only be scary and not be too gameplay focused. So when you're doing those speed runs, that might be a slog. And that's really it. Like this game was really cool. I'm glad, like I said, it turned out to be fantastic. Not that I was worried about it, but Resident Evil 7's marketing was so good in that it kept you guessing everything. How is this connected? Is it connected? What's going on? And when you went in and uncovered it, it was just stunning. I thought they were giving away a little bit too much with 8. I thought they were telling you a little bit too much. But I guess that's since it's a direct sequel to 7, they had to give you a bit more. But yeah, they focused more on the game part of this, the actual like arcadey feel, like the weapons, the combat, without sacrificing the vibe. Like, even though I like the environment of 7 a little bit more, the vibe is the same. Horror, like, just great window dressing around a really fantastic game. And I hope we see more. Like I said, this video may be moved pretty quickly if they release some DLC. And of course, as I go through it and unlock more stuff, I'm going to see more, and I'll talk about it more maybe in a future video. But I just wanted to get out of the way my initial thoughts on what is my game of 2021 so far. I mean, that's probably going to change. Maybe it won't. I won't be sad if this ends up being my game of the year, because it was great. But I want to know your thoughts. What is your favorite Resident Evil? What did you like about this? Did you hate it? Maybe you hated it. It won't bother me if you hate this. But Resident Evil 8 lives up to the legacy. Is it better than 7? I don't know. Not right now, because 7 is complete. 7 has all the DLC, and it was amazing. 8 isn't complete, so I don't want to say that yet. If in a year there's no DLC and it's complete, we'll talk about it then. Let it sink in. Right now I'm in that honeymoon period. But I really enjoyed this game. Can't wait for the next one. I really want to hear what you have to say in the comments. I'll try to get back to you as quick as I can on everything, just to have that discussion. My name is Mike. This has been Chip Damage. Please consider subscribing if you've heard anything you've liked today, and I'll catch you later. Take care of yourselves.